Hello. Hello.
Hello, hi Ben.
Hello.
Jeff, I think everybody seems okay, right? Everything is fine, set, ready. All right, I'll be here if you need me, but I'll quiet myself. Oh, no, at five I'll switch and have the audience experience today. Maybe tomorrow I'll switch here. But during the course of the transmission, if you need me for anything, just let me know. Is everything well aligned with Eve and Rodrigo for moderation?
Yeah, it's all set.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I'll probably talk like this, so this should sound fine. Does that volume sound good to you? How is this? Okay.
Am I in the right place? Thank you. I see Mr. Better connection, better shirt, better background. I see Mr. Evans there at the corner.
Yes. Fabio, may I suggest you be a little bit away from the computer, like a little bit more? It seems like your head is like reaching the top of the screen. I don't know if it's only for me or the audience will see it like this. That's much better now. Thanks.
I'm sorry, can you repeat? The volume should be good. I'm here sitting looking at the screen with about a lot of logos from a company called Guia Marketing. And I see a D, and I see someone named Fonseca Cansado, and Mr. Evans. Mm-hmm. We're pinned down, yes. And where will the questions get to be? Oh, for typical Google Meet. Sure.
Fabio, maybe if you want to see them as they come in, instead of just push notifications, maybe you want to open and leave the chat open on your right corner.
Yeah.
Also, notifications from the control team, such as, you have 10 minutes, 5 minutes, time for questions, and so on, will come in through there too.
How do I leave the site, the chat open?
Just click on the top right corner on the balloon, the message balloon, and leave it there.
Okay. Oh, yeah, here, fine. Yep. Like this, yes.
Sure. Yes, I'll ping him right away. Just a second.
This is the link that will stay for good, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Did this sound come from Ben or Fabio or the control room?
I'm muted now, guys. Is there a Q&A form or there in the platform they're using? What is the name of the platform?
Gather. Yeah, but the audience doesn't really know about this name. It's not an external name. You just need to mention there is an open box for questions below the video's window. This is enough. And just make sure, if you please, to highlight that questions will be, selected somehow or filtered. Maybe filtered is not a great word, but selected.
Selected and curated.
Sorry? Created, yeah. Created is perfect.
Selected and curated for relevance and for popularity.
Good. I just pinged Luis, so just wait a little bit. Flavia, can we follow up on the number of viewers during the session or only after the session?
I think we can do this on the session. During the session, I think we can do that. And with the mainframe open.
Yes, be ready to assess this number, because many people are probably going to write me and ask how many, and it's good to have an answer. So Luis just answered okay. So I guess he will join. He said he's joining in 10 minutes. But I believe it's going to be like 10 minutes before the session, which sounds fine in order to get him ready, right? So, no, he wouldn't do it. Jeff, do you maybe we can free up some time for Ben and Fabio, and just since we've tested them already, or do you feel like we should stay? Fabio, would you mind keeping the camera open? All right. I mean, you guys can,
I'm here, guys. I'm just gonna
yes.
mute.
Yes. All right. So we're good to go. I think it's not a good idea. Maybe we can have a solo show from Ben in this case. But I'm sure he's coming in a few minutes. Yep. Fabio, did you hear from Alan?
No, and I pinged him on Friday night. You haven't heard from him, right?
Nope.
So, Chris, let's, at the end of the day today, I will ping him again after we do this. Okay?
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Super welcome.
Fabio, just leveraging your time here, we will have two, technical assessments with the CEOs invited for Friday's panel during the day of Friday. One at 10 a.m. and Juliana Azevedo will do hers at 3:30 p.m. We didn't include you because you have already been tested somehow. Technically, we'll know today it's working pretty well. But would you like to join, maybe to make them feel welcome or somehow?
Absolutely, yes.
Like this?
I would like to join at least for 5-10 minutes to thank everyone, right?
Okay.
If we can later talk about this, Chris, I'd love to. Maybe tomorrow first thing in the morning, okay?
Sure. I'll write to Juliana and ask for a meeting with you tomorrow first thing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So Flavia, please add Fabio as an optional invitee in both invitations, both the general one in the morning and also Juliana's one.
Okay.
As a heads up, Fabio, the first one is during the sales review, so you might need to jump out of the sales review and then jump back.
No problem.
If it's okay.
Okay.
See? Yes? Mm-hmm. Sir, I will not. Don't worry. I'll only talk to you later in our wrap-up feedback meeting, but I'll be watching as if I was part of the audience. Yes. No worries. It's okay. All right, I'll leave before that, but I'm sort of concerned that Luis didn't join yet. Right, as soon as the countdown begins, I will write him again, just to make sure he's aware. Yep.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, even if it's just virtually. Brazil has always been a special place for me, not just because we share a love of football. Though I have to say, it's exciting to see that the Brazilian national championship is on fire. More than that, I'm inspired by the way Brazilian people are building technology and extending its benefits to everyone. That same passion is what brought Google to Brazil 15 years ago. Since then, it has grown into a thriving engineering and business hub. And today, Brazil is the most prominent market in the region and in the top 5 worldwide when it comes to usage of several of our Google products, such as Search, Chrome, and YouTube. We've been proud to help Brazilians harness the power of the internet to achieve greater knowledge, health, happiness, and success. And that's exactly what our mission to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful is designed to do. That mission has never been more important or more urgent than it is today. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating impact on communities around the world, and I know Brazil has been hit especially hard. In these moments, we've seen how online has been a lifeline for so many businesses. They're embracing digital tools to help them connect with customers and accelerate their own digital transformations. According to IDC, 59% of Brazilian businesses are already transitioning to a hybrid cloud model. I want to commend Brazilian business leaders for being so adaptable and innovative in the face of such uncertainty. We see this moment as an opportunity for technology to be even more helpful to people and businesses as they adapt to a changing world. Google is committed to helping Brazil's businesses grow even stronger. We've been proud to be there in a number of ways. For example, we have helped 600,000 people grow in their careers, find new jobs, and create economic opportunities for others through our Grow with Google digital skills trainings. And in 2020 alone, we helped more than 400,000 small and medium-sized businesses with free training, products, and tools designed to grow their business. And we announced a $340 million global commitment to support SMBs during the pandemic with Google Ads credits, including many Brazilian SMBs. We also made it free for retailers in Brazil to list products on the Google Shopping tab. For many small businesses, this means free exposure to millions of potential buyers. And for consumers, it means more choices. We believe everyone benefits when there is a diverse and thriving ecosystem for commerce. As we look ahead, we are excited for the next 15 years of Google in Brazil, working alongside our most valued partners, all of you. You can count on us to be a close strategic partner to accelerate digital transformation and help people and businesses to grow and succeed. Google Leadership Talks is one of the ways we are committed to doing this. Throughout the week, we are bringing together Google senior leaders, world-class specialists in their fields, and senior leaders from top Brazilian companies for important conversations on technology, diversity, consumer behavior, privacy, and business. These are the 5 themes that will shape business in 2021 and opportunities for Brazil to lead as we move to a post-COVID world. So thank you again for your partnership, and please enjoy the event, and we hope to see you in person soon. Muito obrigado.
Pessoal, super bem-vindos. Boa tarde a todo mundo. Thank you. Let me go back to English now. First, to thank everyone for being here, and I hope you enjoy the next 5 days of this event. Welcome to our Google Leadership Talks. In 5 days, we'll cover 5 very relevant matters for what we have today. We have very important things and issues which arise and became even more important during the COVID-19 pandemics. We'll talk today about technology and its implications and its opportunities and its impact. Then we'll have a chance to discuss privacy, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll also be able to discuss consumer trends and what has changed during the last 11 months. And then we'll have 4 great CEOs here explaining how they make the most out of the moment and dealt with the crisis in their own segments and companies. Today, we'll have 45 minutes. 45 minutes for great content on technology. And for that, we have 2 very special guests here. And then we have 15 minutes for questions. If you guys and girls have a look at the bottom of the screen, there is a box there that you can send your questions in. We'll take a look at the questions, and of course, we'll curate them in terms of questions that are most desired by people for us to answer. And the guests that we brought today to you will be able to answer. So for those that are here, I hope you enjoy the show. And our next 45 minutes, which will have 2 special people. Let me begin with one which has been a very special Googler. This guy will be celebrating 20 years of Google at the end of this year. Luiz André Barroso, carioca, flamenguista, an engineer from PUC with a doctorate degree in USC in California. He's a senior fellow at Google, and it's one of us, one of the great Brazilians here. And Luiz will tell us a little bit about his role and how technology has changed during the year and how things have changed within Google and his impressions of the things. And then we have another great guest later that we'll bring to you. Luiz, tell us, how are you?
Okay, the event doesn't really start until somebody forgets to unmute, isn't it? It was my turn. Obrigado, Fábio. Obrigado a todos. I just wanted to speak a little bit of Portuguese so that you would have some evidence that despite being in the US for the last 30 years, I actually still can speak the language. My wife claims that I get a bit more Brazilian every year that goes by. So there you go. It's an immense pleasure to be here with all of you and Fábio and Ben, who's joining us in a second. Just a little bit about myself. Yes, I'm from Rio. Yes, I suffer from the same malady as Fábio does. We are both suffering fans of Flamengo. Let's see. The essential things you should know about me is I've been at Google for just about 20 years. I was a hardware designer before then, right after my PhD. I came to Google to become a software engineer and spent the majority of my time at Google as an engineer writing software as opposed to building hardware. But Google has allowed me the privilege or the luxury of having multiple careers inside the same company. I am a Google Fellow, which is a technical title, meaning I've done the majority of my work was technical in nature, but even that work varied. I worked from writing early software for Google Search to writing things like Google Scholar and some of our software infrastructure for cluster management. But I worked in hardware. I built our hardware team at Google that designed all our data centers and all our servers over time. I have also acted as a manager for a while. I managed engineering for Google Maps for many years. And until recently, I managed a team called Core, which is an infrastructure horizontal team that provides technology for all of our Google product areas. So it's been an immense amount of fun going from working only on technical problems to managing many thousands of people. and one that had given me a front row seat for a lot of what's been sort of fascinating on industry for these last 20 or so years, which perhaps we'll have a chance to talk about a little bit more during the conversation today. Fabio?
But Luis, before we go to Ben, it's amazing the amount of change that we saw this year, more than ever before. What was the thing that caught your eye that changed the most?
Well, there's, I'm sure Ben's going to tell us a little bit more authoritatively about this, but it's amazing the resiliency of our computing infrastructure, given the load we put on them by moving everybody home and having work and education all remotely. I think it's a testimony for everybody in our industry who have built that infrastructure over the last many decades, not only at Google, but elsewhere. You know, the fact that Google Meet, for example, as soon as the pandemic hit, had an increase in traffic for video conferencing by a factor of 40 in the matter of just a few weeks, and the system did not keel over. It's just remarkable, right? It's absolutely remarkable. And then, of course, the consumer and commerce trends that have come about and accelerated during this year has been incredible to see. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about this as the conversation goes forward.
Thank you, Luis. It's amazing because when we think about the major changes that happened around the world and that we're all able to work, study, and do things from home, I think we couldn't have picked the best person as one of the most renowned analysts in the Silicon Valley, and a person that in between the Silicon Valley and in Europe, he knows a lot about what's happening in the world. Ben Evans is also famous for putting together and sharing one deck, several decks, but this year he became famous for the deck, The Great Unbundling, where he gives us exactly the translation of what's happening in the world. So Ben, it's great to have you here, and thank you. Can you share a little bit with us? It's great to have you with us in Brazil.
Thank you very much for coming. I look forward to being there in person next year. So I think I started my career in 1999, and at that time the internet was very exciting, and a lot of people thought it was kind of crazy. And then in 2001 and 2, people were happy that it seemed to have disappeared. But if we think back to sort of how big the technology industry was then, there were only maybe 150 million people on Earth who had a computer. In technology, the internet, even things that became Google were very exciting and interesting, but they weren't a big part of most people's lives. And now about 4.5 billion people have a smartphone. The internet has become sort of part of everybody's daily life. I always think the best way that you can express this is that Stanford does a study of how Americans meet their partners. And in 2017, over 40% of all new relationships in America started online. In 2019, it was probably 50%. Last year, of course, 100%. And so this stuff has gone from being sort of exciting and interesting, but something that you really didn't have to pay that much attention to if you didn't want to being a basic part of everybody's life. And then in 2020, suddenly we didn't have a choice. We all, as Luis discovered, we had video cameras that we'd never used, and we discovered we had broadband, we discovered we had Gmail, and we all stayed at home and worked from home and discovered that it would work. Before joining this call, I was watching a video from Mark Reed, who's the CEO of WPP. He said he's met 30% more CEOs in lockdown than he did before lockdown because he was on video. And meanwhile, their travel budget is down $30 or $40 million dollars a month, which is also a good thing to hear for a CEO, I think. And so we all sort of discovered that we had to do this. And so we had a year of forced adoption and I think forced experimentation. So forced adoption, forced acceleration, all the things that we knew were happening, that we would all have agreed happened more quickly. So e-commerce stepped forward sort of 5 years in most countries. In the UK, it went from 20% of retail to 30%. In China, from 30% to 40%. In Brazil, I think it's probably gone from under 10% to probably well over 10%. And a little bit of that pulls back, but most of that sticks. we pull forward a bunch of adoption. Then there's things we're not so sure about. Will we all buy groceries online? Will none of us ever get on a plane to do a business trip again? We'll find out. We experiment. We explore that. But I think what's really changed is that the kind of presence of these things has gone from something that you had some technology people to pay attention to, and the children were interested in it, but you could kind of ignore this stuff and get back to doing business as usual. Now this has become kind of a central part of every business. And the reason I called my presentation The Great Unbundling was I was thinking about all of the ways that brands and retailers and businesses and advertisers have to kind of rethink their relationship with their customers, rethink their relationship with the route to market. Because now everybody has to go direct. Everybody has to think in new ways about how their business functions. So everything gets kind of, as we say in English, all the cards have been thrown up in the air and no one quite knows where they're going to settle.
The Great Unbundling. It's an amazing story. When I look at the things that you put there, and if you are watching, someone is watching, those who are watching this video, please refer to this document. If you need that, we can share copies of the Great Unbundling presentation, which was delivered now in January. It's 144 slides, and it tells a lot about how fast and how drastically things have changed in the last year or so. Luis, back to you. I think you guys are here at the start of the show. I'm just here to welcome you, but I'd love to have you two interacting and being able to share with us what you're seeing either in the Silicon Valley or in the industry there.
So we have 15 minutes to explain the world. So I will talk quickly. It's interesting. I mean, I started my career as a mobile analyst, covering mobile operators. In fact, I wrote about some of the Brazilian mobile operators at the time. And the vision of mobile was we will connect everybody, and they sort of achieved that. And then the attention shifted to smartphones. Suddenly we can give everybody a pocket supercomputer connected to another pocket supercomputer. So I have an iPhone or an Android phone, which is a supercomputer, and then it's connected to supercomputers from companies like Google that provide all of these amazing services. And now the great majority of the Earth's population has those. And so now we think, well, what is it that we can do now that everybody has one of these things? What does machine learning enable? What does image recognition, voice recognition, automatic translation enable? What does that make possible for e-commerce? What does that make possible for social applications and for communication? I mean, the analogy I sometimes think of is that sort of the first 50 years of the car industry was working out what cars should look like and building car companies. And the second 50 years of the car industry is what happens when everybody has a car. And that's sort of where we are with the internet now. Like now most people are online. What happens when most people are online?
Yeah, it's a fantastic way to think about it, right? It's the technology and the users of technology trail the technology innovation by a good amount of time. I mean, if you think about the electric car is over 100 years old. And still, maybe less than 1% of the fleet of cars in the world today are electric. We all agreed that the future is electric cars, I think, mostly sort of more than 10 years ago. And yet, technology was not the gating factor. There are other factors in terms of course, pricing and overall adoption of technology that Ben referred to. It's a fascinating time for us to be living in, because I think that when we talk about machine learning, one of my areas of expertise here at Google, my job today, which I haven't mentioned, is coordinating technology across all of our product areas. And one of the areas that I own at Google is a machine learning infrastructure area. It's an area that's deep to my heart because machine learning in some ways has already happened, right? It's old news. The big breakthroughs were probably that really sort of made the revolution we're living today from a technical standpoint happened primarily maybe 7 years ago. We are still in the process of deploying the technology and seeing in what ways it can impact society in a positive manner. And we are yet to see the full benefits of that, which are still, in my view, inspiringly unbounded almost. the number of different areas of our lives in society that have not yet had the opportunity to use and deploy these technologies is immense compared with the very few areas that use them today. And a lot of this is going to happen as we democratize the production of machine learning-based systems. Machine learning has this little bit of a magic thing about it, in that unlike writing tons of code, a domain expert in an area that is not computer science, you're a biologist, or you are an electrician, or you are sort of working in conservation, you're working on education, we're going to be able to give you tools to use machine learning that will not force you to actually learn how to code. And you'll be able to harness that technology in the domain that you command. And I think that the beauty of this is yet to be delivered. And we're beginning to see that right now. It's an exciting time for this technology.
I think that there's a lot of interesting sort of things in what you say. I think one of the ways that I think about machine learning is to compare it with databases. That's to say, we could have been having this conversation in the late 1970s, and we would explain the concept of SQL and a relational database. And we would say, now you're going to be able to ask arbitrary queries. And that would sound kind of interesting, but you wouldn't quite know what that meant. And the answer is that gives us SAP. It gives us Oracle. It gives us just-in-time supply chains. It gives us the container shipping industry in many ways. And I'm sure everybody on this call now could name 20 things that they do with databases, and their business would stop functioning without it. But nobody thinks of databases as being an amazing, transformative new technology, because it happened. It was amazing, and then it changed everything, and then it disappeared. But that took 30, 40 years. And we're in that sort of conversation now with machine learning, which I think is actually quite a lot of what is captured by the phrase digital transformation. That what digital transformation really means is, we're spending the next 10 years moving corporations, moving enterprise technology onto the sort of modern technology, onto modern platforms, into the cloud, into Google and Google's competitors, to machine learning, and everything that kind of gets encapsulated by that. There's a wonderful statistic from Vodafone, one of the world's biggest mobile operators, that they have about 2.5 million paper invoices a year, because they have millions of base stations, and they have shops, and they have customers and suppliers and fiber and trucks. So they have 2.5 million paper invoices a year. What would you do with that with machine learning? What happens if you can automate the recognition of everything in that? There's a sort of a huge wave of, like, what's a good way of putting this? Like, all of the transformation of automation and software and computing that happened in the 80s and 90s, we're kind of going to do again with cloud and machine learning. We're going to go through another of those kind of generational changes.
I think you're absolutely right. And just to close on this one topic, we have other questions too. I suspect you may be seeing this in your own companies. Maybe 10 years ago at Google, the only people who could do machine learning were, half a dozen researchers that dedicated their lives to machine learning. You fast forward to today, machine learning, as Ben suggests, is yet another tool on the toolbox of every software engineer at Google. If you fast forward another 5 years, you won't need to be a software engineer anymore, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before you guys continue, let me just a prompt to the audience here, if you guys can send more questions. But I have a question now for Ben. Ben, you saw some businesses. We keep talking about relevance and to be current in terms of understanding not only machine learning, real-time supply chains and infrastructure, but to be able to have the understanding of data and how data can translate into a more efficient and effective way of doing business. What did you see? What was the main difference in between companies that did well and companies that did not do well in this last year?
So I think there's two ways to answer that. The first of them is that there are companies that were agile, flexible, forward-thinking, were able to adapt and able to move with an unprecedented situation in lots of ways. And, some companies manage that better than others. I think the other thing is there's a conversation I had with the head of a big European luxury goods company who said, the heads of my brands, all the individual brands that he owns, will happily spend a day talking about what kind of brass to use at the point of sale in their store, and how the door should open and what the curtain should look like. But if you ask them about their shopping cart abandonment rate, they'll act as though you started speaking Greek. And that used to be something that you could leave to some engineers, but now it becomes what it is. It's part of what it is to be a retailer. And knowing about that doesn't mean that you're a software company any more than knowing about how the door works means that you're a construction company. It's just part of being a retailer. It's part of understanding how you communicate with your customer. And so in a sense, what happens is this stuff stops being technology that you leave to technology people, and it becomes a core part of your business that you have to understand and internalize. And so you work with your partners, you work with Google, you work with all the other sort of people in the industry. But it's not something that you can just not pay attention to anymore and leave to leave to some other part of it and think that it doesn't matter to you. It's something that has to be kind of a central part of your business. And I think as we went into lockdown and suddenly everybody had to try and buy everything online, you saw a really wide spread between companies that were able to adapt to that, companies that could move to e-commerce quickly, and companies that still kind of wanted you to go to the store because they weren't able to adapt.
Back to you, Luis.
Sure. I have a feeling that Ben, by virtue of his business, is probably looking at much broader landscape of companies than I look to. I spend a disproportionate amount of my time on one company, that being Google. But we have a lot of visibility into many of our partners. And clearly, the people who most quickly understood which were the benefits of this kind of disconnected work and leaned on the things that this enables and try to mitigate the things that made it harder, actually were some of the ones that seem to have done best in terms of overall productivity. One of the things that this has done for Google, for example, interestingly, is that Google actually, even though it's a global company, it's really disproportionately centered in the Bay Area. Suddenly, and meaning that a person on a video conference from New York or from France often felt disadvantaged with respect to a Google employee in Mountain View because they were the ones on the TV. Everybody else was sitting together in the room. And suddenly we could understand the dynamics of being remote in a much more equitable way that taught us a lot about how to run a company globally much more effective than before. Many of us here in the Bay Area were suddenly in the same footing as everybody else out there. No one was in person. The opportunities for learning that were fantastic. And we actually measured engineering productivity, for example, during that whole time and experimented with different ways of helping people be more productive at home. And after a little bit of dip in productivity for the first maybe 6 weeks or so that we saw, we actually recovered quite a bit as measured by productivity proxy metrics that we had, such as, how often were people checking in, so many lines of code, sort of, et cetera, right? Some very crude ways of doing it. One of the parts that was complicated was the ideation part of a project. Projects that were more mature and therefore were more in execution phase didn't actually need everybody to be in the same place quite as much as projects that were in very early stages that really benefited from 4, 5, 6 people brainstorming around them. So we needed to find out ways to mitigate that handicap so that we didn't actually slow down our newest projects that were still sort of in an incubation phase. And I felt that this has been one of the more fascinating aspects of writing kind of that beginning of the pandemic in particular.
There was a fascinating report from a UK retailer called Next, who have had a large mail order business for a long time, talking about what they felt had changed. And sort of on the one hand, I think as many people have said, we're sort of burning social capital. So, as sort of Luis says, when everyone knows what they want to do and everyone knows what to do and everyone knows the plan, it's fairly easy. It's when you want to talk to somebody as you walk to get a coffee that's harder to do in Zoom because you have no peripheral vision. You know, you book the 20-minute Zoom call, you do the call, then you're finished. You don't have the unstructured conversation, which is more difficult. But the other side that they found, because they sell clothes, is that they realized they'd been saving up conversations with their suppliers for a month until the next time they flew to see the supplier. And now they just call the supplier on video, even just on audio. And yes, they can FedEx the fabric back and forth, but you don't necessarily even need to do that. And so it made me think a little bit of how people must have felt the world changed when everyone had a telephone instead of having to write a letter. Like, how does the velocity of how you work change, and what has to be on still a letter or the mail versus telephone? What can you do on the telephone versus walking to another room in the same building? Well, there's a little bit of that shift as we sort of discover, how do we do this? How does this work? And I'm sure, like, there'll be a lot of things where we will get back on a plane, we will go back across town, we will go and see that person. But there's also a lot of things where we'll stay on video, and a lot of sort of small, trivial things that you may not have noticed that will stick. I mean, an obvious thing, I've noticed that all my 1-hour meetings become half-hour calls. And a 1-hour meeting, of course, is also like a half hour of going there and going back again. But then when it's a call, it's okay for it to be 20 minutes. So there's a lot of those kind of small social changes, I think, that will ripple through.
It's fascinating. Many of us, as you can imagine, at Google are looking at in what ways we can enhance existing group video conferencing systems to allow for the serendipitous interactions that Ben just referred to. My best, poor man's version of it these days is that I actually still have a coffee hour reserved every morning, in which I'm always in the same video conferencing meeting. No one needs to be there. No one has to be there. But it's a time where some of my colleagues sometimes are having a coffee as well in the morning here in the US. Some of my colleagues in Europe are at tea time, so they are at a natural break to come in and chat. So we've invented sort of this, little, cooler or coffee machine in the office, again, in this virtual space that actually has been quite a bit of fun. And in fact, has allowed me to have a few unscheduled conversations with, people in Zurich that otherwise, I would only have scheduled formal meetings. And those things actually have strengthened the social bonds we have that are so important for working in large teams.
Yeah, I think we're halfway through this. Step 1 is, we've all got video. Step 2 is, yes, but why am I having a video? What am I doing with this? Should this be on the calendar? How is this supposed to work? And we're kind of groping our way towards new social patterns.
Luis, speaking on that, let me ask you a question here. Know that the engineers, it's a large body of very smart people in Mountain View, in Zurich, and Belo Horizonte here in Brazil. How are they dealing with this? Not only in terms of having to redesign, you mentioned quite well that whatever is like early or early stage or newglers, they have a harder time. And of course, we're all concerned about the whole notion of well-being for every employee, and for every employee of Google and of our friends and business partners. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question, Fabio. When the pandemic started, I actually was still managing a group of nearly 10,000 people. And we are at the same time in a situation where actually we are a hub for the world, trying to keep the world online, right? Besides keeping our company going. But our employees are suffering, right? Our employees suddenly have their children at home and are unable to focus on work as much as they can. They actually are stressed because, if we think we don't know enough about the pandemic now, if you remember the way it was in March and April, it was even more so. So trying to find out the right balance between knowing how hard you can push your teams during these difficult times, how much do you need to actually read between the lines and understand when is it that they actually need a little bit of a time away. And I think this is probably a feature of many places with lots of high-performing individuals. You have to force them to take time off. they have a sense of responsibility for the things that they are doing that will keep them working until they fall down. So one of the things we realized relatively quickly is that not only we had to actually tell people, no, this is not going to be over in 6 weeks. This is a marathon. You have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of your family. Otherwise, we're not going to make it through this. So we began talking to people about this, and it helped a bit, but not very much. The thing that really helped was leading by example. It's basically me going and telling my team, hello, folks, I'm actually taking this Friday off. No, I'm not available for any meetings this Friday, and made it universally visible for everyone, right? And as many of you who are listening to us who are in positions of leadership, modeling the behavior you want to see is the one thing that works, right? You can talk your mouth off until you begin to actually modeling that behavior. Your folks are not gonna follow you. And then the other thing is to realize that people are in different places. I actually happen to not have children at home. I have one of the relatively fortunate ones in that my home situation didn't actually get complicated by COVID. And many of my colleagues actually are in that situation, while others are really deeply impacted by it. So understanding how to modulate the way you manage people in that dimension is important. I think a feature of every great manager is that it's not who you are as a manager. You are a different manager for each one of the people that you manage. They need different managers, and you need to be that different manager for each one of them. And in this particular case, there was another dimension for it, which was their personal situation. And sometimes people just needed to dive deep into work. They needed to forget about everything else. And you needed to load them with as much tasks as possible. They couldn't get enough. While others clearly were not in that position. And you needed to develop the trust so that they can tell you this, and then the sensitivity to do the work allocation adjustments that are necessary to keep everybody going.
Fascinating. It's funny because we need to have the utmost respect for every business leader which is here with us, as we understand that we are different people, different business, different moments in the market. And behind that is a lot of people with completely different familiar and personal situations. Ben, speaking on this and speaking on business trends, which were the business trends that caught your eye the most in the last 12 months? What changed that you think that it's the beginning of a bigger change going forward?
Well, there have been very obvious things. So the growth of video and things like grocery delivery. I think consumers doing video calls in the UK doubled, went from 30% to 80% in about 2 weeks. Grocery delivery doubled from 5% to 10%. So there are some of those that are obvious. I think the sort of second step is the explosion of everyone trying to work out, well, how should work? How should productivity work? What should we be doing? Should we be doing a video call or something else? I think there's a sort of a real acceleration in people thinking about how e-commerce works. Like, what am I trying to do here? How would I know that that product exists? How would I find out about it? Do I want to just go and do a generic search on Amazon, or is there another kind of experience? So it's been very interesting, for example, seeing Shopify grow really, really fast. There's a shift in how people find things, a shift in how e-commerce works. We've had waves of new social software being created. So we've had this sort of period of like pent-up creativity in that you can't go out, you can't walk down the street, you can't go to a bar. So all of that energy gets sort of focused inwards in trying to create new tools, work out new experiences, work out new ways of doing things. There's a great quote from the Dickens novel about the French Revolution, Great Expectations. He says it's the best of times and the worst of times. It's fantastic and it's terrible at the same time. And I think that's sort of some way of thinking about what technology has looked like, in the last 12 months. It's fantastic and terrible. There's a huge amount of creation going on along with all the other stuff that we know about.
And one of the things that occurs to me in terms of a shifting trend that I think has legs, that's gonna stay with us, is what we saw on YouTube in this past year, in the success of live events, especially in Brazil. I think, Fabio, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Brazil had like 7 of the top 10 biggest sort of, live streaming sort of musical events of the year. Is that approximately correct?
Yes, not only musical, but also we have 2 Fla-Flus that were up there. Remember the final of the championship?
That's right.
That was part of the game. Luis, I have a question here for you from the audience. It's Camila is asking, how is Google addressing the changes on the jobs of tomorrow, or the challenges of the job of tomorrow, and the lack of skills that most people to perform in this scenario? How do you see capacitation, technical capacitation, especially given the change so quickly happening in technology?
Sure. I will. Let me talk briefly about this, if I can. First, we all have to recognize the fact that job displacement, probably has been happening since the Bronze Age, I suspect. There's a great sketch comedy that I love. Actually, it's a British sketch comedy from David Mitchell and Robert Webb, in which somebody comes in trying to teach these sort of old stone tool people how to actually work with bronze, because bronze is the great new thing. But you can go back to the Industrial Revolution, right? And the livelihood of entire towns in northern England, in many places in the world, were challenged by technology at that time in ways that I wonder if our current revolution actually could be more disruptive than that, right? I'm actually an optimist in this regard. I'm an optimist for lots of reasons. First, I think that there's a trend towards literacy across the world, that the internet and the availability of information on the internet makes it possible for somebody to acquire new skills with much less friction than it was ever possible before. We have amazing stories of high school students in the middle of sub-Saharan Africa that learn how to use TensorFlow, a language for machine learning programs, with no computer science education whatsoever, right? So, a little bit of access to technology can go a long, long, long way. So I'm optimist that this will be a factor that really wasn't there in previous situations where big job displacement by technology threatened. So that's one thing that makes me hopeful. The second is that all of our technical companies are short on talent, and we're all investing on it. And in particular, Google, and I'm sure many others are, we have job retraining programs that are incredibly successful, which don't require a university education, gives you a certificate that actually tells people that you are skilled in a subset of tasks in the IT world, that begin to be a way for lots of people to actually change jobs from one sector of the economy to another. Even if in the beginning they're sort of IT jobs, my goodness, almost everybody needs an IT expert these days to make sure their video conferences work. So the market for these kinds of even entry-level skills in information technology is here to stay. So I think that that's the other part that makes me optimistic. The other one that makes me a little bit optimistic, frankly, as somebody who has some understanding of the potential of artificial intelligence and machine learning, is that by and large, the majority of the futurists that I read about vastly overestimate the capabilities of deep learning and machine learning as we actually have it today. So this idea, it's a bit like the jetpack that people wanted us to have like 30 years ago, right? So the fear that suddenly there will be these superhuman things replacing sort of every job, I think is vastly exaggerated. The technology we have is amazing today. It can do fantastic things. It actually is relatively limited in its ability to approach something that's anywhere near human cognition. We're a long way away from that. And that will have a positive impact in job displacement as well.
My best description of what we can do, what machine learning can do, is a friend of mine said it can probably do anything that you can train a dog to do. That's probably where we'll get to. We're not there yet. And, I'd absolutely agree with Louise. We have been displacing jobs for 200 years, and that's painful. The people whose jobs are displaced are in pain. We need to think about how we manage that. But we probably shouldn't expect some fundamentally different kind of displacement to the ones that we've been having for the last 200 years, 300 years. It's just a continuation of that process. So you have to think about how you manage it. But we shouldn't expect absolutely that we will have kind of, computers that walking around our streets doing all the work, and we won't have anything to do. I think the part of the kind of the challenge of this conversation is, in some ways, the people who know most about machine learning are the people who are least excited about it. In some ways, so people who know a little bit about machine learning think, "Oh my God, we're going to have HAL 9000. We're going to have human intelligence in computers tomorrow." The people who actually work on machining say, "Yeah, it might be a little bit better at counting."
But Ben, I have a question for you about quantum computing. How do you see that? As it's getting more and more popular, more accessible throughout the years, how much this will affect machine learning? How much this will affect the way machine learning innovates?
So I don't think most people see quantum as particularly related to machine learning. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting piece of what we call frontier science, which means sort of something that isn't working yet, but might start working in the next sort of 5 years or so. And there's a lot of people who think they might have something that works here. It's relevant to a very sort of specific set of maths, and actually Louis may know more about this than me, but essentially it's relevant to a kind of mathematics that's used for encryption and used for certain kinds of biological research. So people who are trying to design new molecules to make new drugs, which of course has become very relevant in the last 12 months, are very interested in quantum. It's probably not something that you'll be using on your smartphone. It's sort of restricted to some quite kind of narrow applications. And as I said, it might start working quite soon. On the other hand, people thought that AI would start working in the 50s, and we're still working on it.
I see.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much spot on. The amount of enthusiasm in that area, I think it's welcomed. We just don't want to have it happen to the quantum field what happened to AI. I mean, AI overpromised in the 70s, and it was considered a bust, and the investment in the area then dried out for decades, which hasn't been good. Right. It would have been much better if we had had steady continuation of investments in AI during that time, which might have happened hadn't it been hyped so much in the beginning. So we're trying to make sure that doesn't happen with quantum. Quantum is going to be super useful, as Ben suggests, amenable to a very limited amount of problems. Cryptography is very likely the first one. We need to actually be developing crypto hard algorithms today, because data that's encrypted today is going to be sitting on disk drives or things like disk drives for 10 years. And maybe 10 years from now, quantum cryptography will be able to actually, break those codes. So we probably should begin thinking about that now. And as Ben says, in things that mimic nature, like the understanding of molecules and proteins, there is a certain degree of enthusiasm. But it's an area we should continue to invest, not expecting anything in the short term.
I see. Hey, a question from Henrique Troitinho. Obrigado, Henrique. I have a question for Ben. Ben, I'm still struck by the Great Unbundling document. And you have a vision there about the next 50 years of technology. Can you share a little bit that vision with the audience here?
Sure. So I alluded it to this sort of briefly a few minutes ago. It's really an observation that if you look at, I was looking at an advertisement for a Pan Am flight from New York to London in 1958 on the first jet airliners, so a 707. And the airliner looks exactly the same as they do now. The flight took the same amount of time. The cabin looks a lot more comfortable than the cabin looks today. And so people look at this and say, oh, the aircraft haven't really improved, except that flight cost $4,500 in today's money. And the aircraft was about 100 times more likely to crash. And so what actually changed is that first they worked out what the plane should look like, and then we made the plane much better, much safer, and much cheaper. And then the same thing happens to cars. I mean, a car today looks much the same as a car 50 or 60 years ago, until you get into a crash, or until you fill it up, or until you measure the fuel efficiency or the emissions. And so we worked out what the car should look like, and then we made the car much safer, much more efficient. And the other thing that changed is, we worked out what the car should be, and then everybody got one. And so the world changed because everybody had a car. The world changed because of cheap air travel, because suddenly you could fly anywhere. It was a normal thing. Louis mentioned the north of England. 75 years ago in the north of England, you went on holiday to a beach in the north of England. And, I know what Brazilians probably think about British weather. And you're right, a beach in the north of England is not as appealing as a beach in Spain. And that's what air travel did for all of those people. And I think there's a sort of a similar point about technology, about software, about computers, that sort of step one is, okay, what would a computer be? How would it work? How would we give one to everybody? And then step two is, well, what happens when everybody has one of these? And so there's this great observation that far more millionaires were created by the car industry in retail and real estate than were created in the actual car industry. Like, you maybe made like 100 millionaires in the car industry, but massively more in retail, in real estate, in building houses, in everything that changed because everybody had a car. And I think there's a similar thing that we now have in the sort of coming decades around computing, around the internet, software, smartphones. It's how many new businesses happen because everybody is now connected, because everybody has a pocket supercomputer connected to the global supercomputer that Louis runs. With his can of oil and his oily rag, he cleans it every morning. And it's that sort of evolution, that deployment that I think is really interesting now, which is, e-commerce. And it's the point I made earlier about dating. Now everybody can meet their partner online. Well, that becomes possible because everybody has these things.
One thing, Ben, that I was very curious about your take with respect to unbundling has to do with what it seems to me on the surface, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, as being a trend going against it. I mean, Google, I'll explain what I mean. At Google, we like to think of us as a relatively open technology company, in that the artifacts that we build, take Android or Chrome, for example, tend to be open or open source. We tend to like open ecosystems. We tend to actually have our systems interoperate with the vast majority of other systems and devices sort of out there. So one of the things that's appealing to me personally about the unbundling idea is that, Google seems to be a company quite ripe for things like unbundling. And yet you see other companies with their own sort of relatively closed ecosystems, for which unbundling becomes something that may be just not allowed by the ecosystem itself, right? And also, to be frank, there are simplifications and simplifying assumptions with a completely closed ecosystem, right? Apple deals with Apple when it has to make phones. Google needs to deal with hundreds of OEMs sort of out there. And there's a natural complexity that comes about with that choice. So it's not like one is right or one is wrong, but they certainly are different. And one seems to be a bit more compatible with the directions you propose. Am I getting some of this right?
Well, so, I mean, the unbundling, there's this famous quote from Craig Barksdale, who is a co-founder of Netscape, where he said there's only two ways to make money, bundling and unbundling. And that's not specific to technology. So a supermarket is a bundle. And then you make a small food boutique, and then you've unbundled the supermarket. And so, a shopping mall is a bundle. And then you say, no, I don't want to be in a shopping mall. I want my own place. So then you've unbundled it. And then you bundle the store up. So there's always this pendulum that swings back and forth. And then when one looks at technology, that gets complicated because you've got kind of different layers of abstraction. So an iPhone is a proprietary system, but then they have an app store with hundreds of thousands of apps. and they build that on top of ARM processors that are then made by TSMC in Taiwan, and the iPhone is then manufactured by Foxconn in China. So there are many kind of layers where some of it's bundled and some of it's unbundled, and it kind of depends which bit you look at it. The same thing for Google. Google provides this fantastic search engine that then acts as a sort of single unified layer that you then have millions of companies operating on top of. So is Google a bundle or is it unbundled? Well, it depends kind of which layer do you look in the stack. I think the change that's happening now, and this actually comes back to the earlier question about employment, is what all of these companies do is make it easier for other people to build on top of them. They provide platforms. And so I don't need to get a meeting with somebody at Google to be listed in the Google search engine. Google just indexes me. They provide that to me. I don't need to get a meeting at Apple to be in the App Store. Anyone can be in the App Store. And so you have these companies that provide platforms that mean if you want to start a software company, if you want to create an online store now, 20 years ago, that would have been tens of millions of dollars. Now, you can be in Google, you can be on an app store on Android or iOS, you can use Shopify, you can use Amazon, you can use Google Cloud. And all of those things, what all of those companies do, all with slightly different approaches, is they take something that would have been millions of dollars of your investment and they give it to you for $10 a month. And so that's kind of hugely enabling to all sorts of other people creating businesses. I mean, my favorite example of this is Instagram. Which had, I forget the exact number, but when Facebook bought Instagram, it had, say, 50 million people using it. And I think they had 10 employees. And that's kind of the enablement of the platforms and the enablement of the unbundling. They didn't need 1,000 people. They didn't need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. They could get to that sitting on Google, Apple, Amazon, all of these companies with 10 people.
Amazing. I have a final question here. We're getting close to the hour, and you're talking about unbundling. It's amazing. What is the role of brands in this moment of unbundling? If I can ask it differently, it's a question from Juliana Mateus. In this great unbundling scenario, what will make up for relevant brands? What will make up for relevance? And in your opinion, can companies be relevant for people considering the transformation we're going through?
Well, so there's this wonderful quote from Mr. Lehman, the Brazilian who bought Kraft Heinz, who he said, "I'm a terrified dinosaur. I thought I was in a cozy world of old brands, nothing changing very much. I just had to be efficient. And now everything's being disrupted." Now, who is that good for? Well, it depends what kind of brand you are. It depends how nimble you are. One of the slides in my presentation is that L'Oreal is now selling 25% of their revenue direct. Nike is selling 15% of their revenue direct on their website and another 15% through their own stores. So there are some brands that can do that. There are other brands that were going through the supermarket will now go through the supermarket, Google, Amazon, Mercado Libre, whoever the right kind of intermediary layer is, or through Instagram. But I think the change, sort of one of the interesting structural change here is that an awful lot of brands were actually B2B businesses. So they had a consumer brand, but they didn't sell to consumers. They sold trucks full of product to the supermarket. So if you will walk into Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati and say, "Can I buy some makeup?" or "Can I buy some shampoo?" And so we don't sell shampoo. We sell trucks full of shampoo. And now they have to think about, well, do we want to sell direct to consumers? What would that mean? What kind of products would we have? Do we have different SKUs? Do we have different brands? What kind of brands do consumers recognize and look for? What relationship do they have with a clothing brand, and a CPG brand, a car brand? How does all of that reconfigure? Because previously you had this very simple progression. You made the product, you spent money on advertising, you spent money paying a retailer to sell it for you. You gave the retailer a margin. And now you think, okay, do I give a retailer 50%, or do I take 25% and put that in more advertising and another 25% and put that in fulfillment? Or do I open a store? And in the past, you never really asked that. You gave the product to Walmart and you gave the money to WPP, and WPP gave the money to the TV station, and you went home. I mentioned, watching Mark Reed talking about this morning. He said, in 1990, what was your marketing plan? Well, you went and had lunch with the head of ITV. And, in an hour, you decided your marketing plan for the year. And now all of that gets unbundled. Some of it's Google, some of it's Instagram, some of it's Amazon, some of it's Mercado Libre, some of it is FedEx, some of it is Rent. But those all kind of blow into the same question. How do I reach my customer? How do I want to reach my customer? What kind of relationship can I have with them?
I was going to do one final observation here. I know we're at time. That on a completely different direction, if you just think of technology and technology alone, getting technology ecosystems to work well is incredibly hard, right? So in the end, a consumer wants the whole world of electronics to be a bundle, which not necessarily in the definition that Ben has, but in the sense that we expect things to just work, and they absolutely don't today, right? And there's a technical challenge there as we go through this revolution to making sure that technology is still something that works for all of you, regardless of the kinds of devices and places you have. And I'll stop here, Fabio.
Yeah. Listen, I have a last question here. I know we have to be sharp. Actually became much sharper about timing, but there is a question, Luis, from your brother, from someone called Carlos Barroso. And he's saying, Luis, in your opinion, what is the lesson we should learn from this crisis in general?
Oh, thank you, Carlos. Nothing like an open-ended question when you have minus 30 seconds to answer it. The thing that I've learned is more so than anything else is that the business we are in today is a team sport. When I left my PhD, 2-3 brilliant people could make something happen in the technical world and in technology. Not the case today. And like it was in biology before then. Right? Today you see advances in biology. There's hundreds of authors because the complexity of the problem has grown to that degree. As we are trying to actually make a company like ours work from home with soon, 200,000 employees, the awareness that I have today that computing and computer science is a team sport, and that we are better not just by how good of a technology provider we are or technologists we are individually, but the quality of our team is the one thing that's come to the forefront here. It is a team sport. We need to be able to do it better as a team. I'll stop.
Luis, I understand this is not only about technologists, but about business in general. We learn to appreciate even more the notion of being a team sport and how every member of the team is and behaves. Listen, thank you, Luis, for making the way. Thank you, Ben, for showing us the way with the trends. I'd like to invite everybody here for a second session tomorrow at 5 o'clock. We'll be discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I hope you guys have enjoyed the panel today. So thanks everyone in the audience. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you, Ben and Luis.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.